Hello, I am meeting today with Stephen Sickel, and I wanted to invite him into the conversation that we're having about short-term missions. And just as a piece to get started, mission has changed a lot over the last, well, especially over the last 100 to 200 years, but even in the last 50, 60 years. In earlier times of mission, travel was it required days, weeks, and it even required months. It just took a long time to get from one place to the other. If you had to go by ship or even cars and things, depending on where you're going, it just took a long time. And usually missionaries, as they went to new places, they were less likely to come across people in the location where they went who spoke their core language, whether it be English or whatever. And so as missionaries went to a new place, they had to go through this long and extensive time of language learning, culture learning, just to be able to communicate. And missionaries most often were involved in what's called pioneer work. That means that they were going into places where there was little or no presence of the gospel, the church, especially not the Church of the Nazarene. And so the work that they did was pioneer work. They weren't coming alongside something that was already there, but they were pioneering something new. All of that just to say that what was required to be a missionary was people who were trained career professionals, people who would invest extensive amount of time to acquire linguistic fluency, and I need the same thing here, and cultural understanding, as well as theological understanding, because they were forming and shaping a whole new church. And today, however, a lot of those dynamics have changed. We still are involved in pioneer work to an extent, but by and far, the large majority of churches is a matter of partnership. Um, Travelers, you could go from almost any one place on the world to another within 1 to 2 days. And so what happens is people could say, well, I could take a few days of vacation and I could go to another place around the world, serve for a week, maybe 10 days, and be back to my regular job. And I could go and serve and be a part of that mission there. And another dynamic that's changed drastically is before, where you would go to these very pioneer areas. Today, especially if you were to go to Africa, Latin America, you'll find these large, vibrant churches that are there and already present. And so you're not walking into a place where there's nothing there. And so the big need for today is less for the majority of missionaries to be these career missionaries who take years to learn a language and learn all these skills to initiate the work and plant the church, but rather missionaries who can be involved in a partnering relationship type activity that centers on the ministry of the local church where you're at. And so today, the divide isn't necessarily going from one place where there's a gospel witness and where there's a church to one place where there's not a church and a gospel witness, but rather it may be going from places where the church is older, established, and happens to be in a place where there's economic security, to other places that are new and vibrant and growing, but are also in places with great financial and material constraint. And so the whole idea of short-term mission is something we seriously have to look at because it paints nearly everything we do in mission. So I've invited Stephen Sickel to be with us today. Stephen's the global coordinator for Work and Witness and Partnerships at the Church of the Nazarene Global Ministry Center. And Stephen's been a missionary for years, and he's worked, countless number of work with witness teams and work with volunteers. And so, I think it's good for you to know Stephen, but I think it's also good for you to be in contact as a resource for you as you develop. So let me bring Stephen into this conversation. And I just want, Stephen, if you could just begin and just talk a little bit about how does short-term mission fit into this bigger picture of the mission work of the Church of the Nazarene.
Thanks, Dr. Wexley. It's a great question, and I'll try and keep it as short as I can. But short-term missions has been it's an opportunity to connect churches and encourage one another. As you were talking about pioneer missions and the difference from what it was to what it is now, I was thinking about how it was a sending missionaries out, and now we're talking and more focused about a global church.
Yeah.
And so short-term missions to me is how do we connect that global church, and not even just the American church or the church in America to the church in another country, but we have short-term mission trips going from Brazil to a country in Africa. It's not just going from the West out. So it's taken on and evolved into to just the church mobilizing and connecting with herself. And what can happen through those connections is encouragement. When you're visiting a church that is hard to get to, where it takes multiple flights or multiple buses or hours to travel to a church, that church knows it's hard to get to. That church knows that it's out in not a touristy area, and so by the presence of foreigners or outsiders coming to that community, it's giving credibility to that community, saying we're a part of a bigger thing. We're part of a global church. And so it assists them in their ministry and their community. It encourages them. It's like a boost to say, all right, we're going to do this and we're in it together.
Yeah.
You can, so even in pioneer missions now, you can use a short-term missions team to create a spectacle, a positive one, hopefully, that would attract attention, to say that, hey, these people that are in here talking about a holiness message, or this church, these evangelists that have been knocking on our doors the past few months, have this team of people that now, and they're not just these crazies, but they are part of something more established that we just haven't heard about yet. And maybe I want to listen.
Yeah.
So short-term missions, we've used it a lot in the Church of the Nazarene with just construction, or primarily construction. But we're also seeing how we can use it in sports, in evangelism, in medicine, and engineering. We have seen opportunities for teachers, educators, math teachers, or professors, not just of biblical topics, but of general education topics, come in and be able to use their skills and talents to open doors.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. I think a lot of us have, there's a lot of people who experience short-term mission, either going and participating, that's been life-changing for them. And I think there's a lot of churches and places that would say, yeah, this has really given life to the church where we're at. In the mix of all this, what are challenges?
Well, it comes with a lot of stories. When we talk about short-term missions, it's also important to realize we're talking about a sending and receiving. And so benefits from the sending church could also be challenges on the receiving church, or vice versa. So a lot of times we do have to recognize who we're talking about, because a benefit for the sending church could be extremely challenging whenever you're bringing in lots of money, people with great intentions. Sometimes generosity can be a challenge.
Yeah.
So I'd call that misguided generosity. Um, and so the role of a missionary as a intermediary for a short-term missions trip, you have to recognize the challenges of culture, of finances, of communication, and some of those are simple as far as translation is concerned, or giving an orientation about culture. But how do people, you know, what is the culture of hospitality? How
Yeah.
does this culture receive guests or listen to guests? How do they take suggestions?
Mhm.
How do they recognize the gift? And so by sometimes a simple act of giving something to another person whenever you travel to another country can create more complications of jealousy or misunderstanding than necessarily what we intend it to be whenever we give a gift.
Can you
Uh,
can you without giving names or places, uh, you talk about misguided generosity, and it's a fascinating term because generosity. We think, well, God's called us to be generous with what we have, and we give, and how could that be bad? Um, can you expound a little bit more on that? Maybe if you have a specific example of how, I've got it's like I've got all these resources here, and then I've got my friends over here who desperately need resources. Why could it be wrong or misguided for me to give?
we so for 4 of our 10 years serving as missionaries and hosting work and witness teams, we lived in Mexico, and we served in Mexico, and Mexico has a long history of receiving mission trips because of the proximity to the United States. There are some churches, and I won't even say what part of the country, but we had a team come down, and they were working in a zone where there were multiple churches involved, and it was a group of I think it was about 150 people. And while they were there, the two of the churches that were part of receiving this large group were fighting over who would have this group in Sunday morning. And it wasn't for the sake of worshiping with our brothers and sisters, and they didn't want to split them up, but it was because of the offering,
Yeah.
because they knew that while they were visiting, they would receive a generous offering. The Some of the projects that these churches would submit, um, they were unnecessary, but they knew that if they submitted a project that was well written, that this team would come and build something for them. And so these churches learned how to not manipulate, but present themselves in a way that appeared poor so that they would receive.
Yeah.
A lot of the churches in Mexico are not like that, and that's a few, but it was an evidence. It was evidence of how our generosity and wanting to give, um, it skewed how we could use these teams. And it also did not provide opportunity for that church to raise funds or to take care of some of their own basic needs, where we had projects submitted to retile a bathroom. We could retile a bathroom with offerings given. Um, and on the other hand, again, a church in Mexico or a district in Mexico, we had a disaster happen, an earthquake, damaged 75 churches in one night. And we had a donor that gave about $100,000.
Wow.
And this donor, we were walking together and looking at projects, and he said, he started talking to this church and said, how about, or how much money would it take to rebuild this retaining wall? And
Yeah.
the church replied, and they said about 20,000 pesos. and or I'm sorry, 100,000 pesos. And the donor asked, how much do you have in the bank? And the church replied, we have 20,000 in the bank. And so the donors then suggested, how about you raise the 30,000 pesos, and then we will add 50,000. And the next Sunday, that church had raised the matching amount. And through that $100,000, that district was able to raise $60,000.
Yeah.
And so that the resources that were provided were multiplied because we were inviting that local church to participate instead of just handing out money. And we were encouraging them to say that, you were a big part of this.
Yeah.
And it changed the mentality of the role that we play in missions, or this church or this district in Mexico. What is their role? Their role is not the poor people to receive, but they are partners in this, even if they don't possess, or they don't think they possess, the same monetary resources.
Yeah. I want to pick up on that just a bit. In missiology, there's a couple of things historically throughout the life of missiology. We've talked about two things that are very deadly in new places that we work to overcome, and one is dependency. Mm-hmm. Dependency is where the one place is dependent on the other in order to do any kind of ministry, and to the point where they're so dependent that it's difficult to imagine functioning within local economy. And the other is paternalism. And paternalism is where those who have the money, pretty much, it's kind of like the parents, well, we make the money, we pay the bills, and so while you're in our house, you're going to obey the rules. And that could happen in different forms of mission. Talk a little bit about maybe what are some practices or things that could be done that help overcome some of these well-meaning but potentially dangerous outcomes of short-term mission.
I think it starts with the missionary. It
Mm-hmm.
starts with our attitudes coming into a country as learners.
Yeah.
And if we come into a country saying that I am learning and I'm learning from you, mm-hmm. I'm not coming in with authority. I'm not coming in. Sometimes you have structural authority or given authority, but you are the experts of this country and I'm only temporary here.
Yeah.
And then explaining that to the short-term missions team that's coming in as well, that you're coming in as learners. Even if you're an expert, you're still a learner. Yeah. You're learning. You may have to learn how they do it in your field, that you are an expert in your own context. But if you're a welder and you're coming from the United States and you're certified in all these things, and you come here, you're going to have to adapt to different machines or different materials, mm-hmm. that are different from what you're used to. Mm-hmm. And whether you're a preacher, you're going to have to overcome different contexts or backgrounds. You have to overcome language difficulties. So no matter how you're coming, whether you're the missionary or short-term, coming in as an expert is dangerous, because you don't give anybody else space to excel.
Yeah.
And our job as missionaries, as well as short-term missions facilitators, is to lift up the church.
Yeah.
Give them space to excel or to grow, so that when the short-term team leaves or when the longer-term missionary leaves, these leaders are empowered and stronger because of your presence, mm-hmm. And not weaker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an important point, that just because someone has less financial resources doesn't mean they're less intelligent, mm-hmm. Or certainly doesn't mean they understand their context any less. Yeah, it's good. What else?
Challenges with short-term missions would be expectations. We have conflict whenever we have unmet expectations.
Yeah.
And so being able to communicate that to both the receiving church and the sending church, of laying out, hey, we might not have a plan, or we're going to develop the plan on the fly.
Yeah.
Those are important things to articulate, as well as understanding both sides of, all right, your expectations might be set from previous trips you've had, and it went this way, money was handled in this way. So clarifying expectations ahead of time with finances, with schedule, with interactions, food. Those are important things to clarify ahead of time, so that whenever somebody's on the ground, we're not, whoa, you're saying we're only going to eat meat this whole time, or I have to eat vegetables,
Yeah.
period. Like those kind of things are harder for somebody to absorb when they've been building up for this trip, and those expectations aren't met.
Yeah. Talk to me a minute about, you have expectations. I think it's an important piece, but you have expectations going both ways.
Right.
You have expectations of the host who's receiving a team, or even in their location, even if they're working somewhere else, but they're the host, and so they have certain expectations. Those who are coming in, and they may have some resources to add to that, they have expectations as well. What is the role of the missionary or whoever in making sure that cross culturally you can say something and you think the words are the right words, but how they're interpreted and how they're understood are completely different?
That never happened to me. um, some of it's repetition, some of it's coming at it from different angles, and part of it is asking the other side to repeat what you think that you've communicated.
Yeah.
Or asking somebody else, a third party, to have it explained to them, to be able to kind of triangulate
Yeah.
what those expectations have been communicated. Depending on the culture, and I mean, those are lessons that you're going to have to learn for just functioning in that culture that you're working in.
Yeah.
You have to. Some cultures are more passive, and some are more direct. And then it gets even more complicated when finances or resources are involved.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Uh,
You have a missionary usually involved in this, whether it's a work witness coordinator or, I worked in education, but I still was working with them, and they usually understand both sides of this, at least parts of both sides of this equation, probably in a unique place to help people both sides to listen and understand one another. But yeah. Um, yeah. Any other things that you could say, these are either challenges or healthy practices to maximize this type of ministry?
Sometimes when we invest a lot of money to travel, to go somewhere, we have this image of, we're going to go and bring the gospel, or we're going to go and we're going to help these poor people, or we've been invited to go because we are children's workers and we're wanting to do a VBS.
Yeah.
And we get so excited, and we're given this platform that we kind of push aside the local church. Even I've seen pastors come down and they've been invited to preach, or their goal is to evangelize in another country and bring souls to Christ, which are, again, very well-meaning.
Yeah.
Even as missionaries, if we're taking the role of leadership or an opportunity to be in front, what is that community going to remember?
Yeah.
Whose face are they going to remember? Whose names are they going to remember? As visitors, whether it's short term or long term, are we giving space and opportunity for the local church to step up, or the local pastor? If this foreign pastor is coming in, but then brings the local pastor that might be shy or timid compared to this gregarious American, we are elevating their status in their community. Or if we have doctors that are coming in and they're doing this clinic, and we're asking the local doctor, what do you think? Or how can we raise up the people in that local congregation or community, so that by the time we leave, this church has a greater standing in this community. We were working in a community in Costa Rica, and this church had a hard time getting permits to build their church building. And when this work and witness team came in, we asked the community what they needed, and they said a bus stop with a roof because it rains a lot in Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
So we built a bus stop, and we painted the soccer goals and the fence around the soccer field, the main community space.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after that, we were given permission to build, and then later a work and witness team was able to build the church. And it was by providing that grace in that community. It wasn't a bribe, it wasn't an entrance fee, but it was saying, hey, you care about this community more than just yourselves and your own congregation.
Yeah.
And so these kind of ways that we can utilize the short-term mission teams to open doors and elevate the status of this congregation or pastor is a huge opportunity that we have through short-term missions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I like that the local church where we're at, everything should center around them. That and I think what you said earlier about what was it, being learners, is vital. And that's not just a pretend we're learners, but to really understand that they really know where they're at, and we have a lot to learn from that. And even how we're going to approach this. I mean, we may say, oh, of course, this is what they need. But to listen, and they may have very different ideas, and it usually makes a lot of sense, like putting a roof over a bus stop where it rains a whole lot. So, yeah. Well, Stephen, this is good. We need to wrap it up, but I really, there's so much here, and I really would like for hopefully our discussion to help point some people to you, to be in dialogue with you, because you're constantly talking to people who are working and trying to work on collecting some best practices that happen in different places, and I think that would be good. Any final words from you?
Even I'm still learning. So
Yeah.
my context was Mexico and Central America, and I learned a lot. And so even there, I have room to learn. So I do enjoy dialogue, and I do enjoy continuing to learn. So I don't have the answers, but I definitely like to bounce ideas off and try to come up with creative solutions to some of the struggles that we're going through together. So
Yeah. And undoubtedly, short-term missions is going to probably change like everything else is. As society continues to move from this, everybody isolated because of the pandemic and everything, and then moving into different other forms as we move forward. So, yeah, it's good to be in dialogue. Well, God bless you, brother, and thank you so much.
Thank you.